For 15 years, I cooked and cleaned and was always left out of every family photo. My sister got everything. When my grandmother died, my mother tried to leave me in the hallway during the will reading. My mom blocked the door and said, "Wait in the hall, this is family business." I started to walk out. The lawyer looked up and said, "No, she has to be here." Then he read a letter. My sister looked confused. My mother looked at my father. His face went completely white. "I am Zara. I am 32 years old and a forensic accountant specializing in uncovering corporate wire fraud. As a successful financial investigator, I spend my days tracking down stolen millions for major corporations. But my hardest case has always been surviving my own family. Growing up in the ultra-wealthy high society of Atlanta, Georgia, meant everything was about status and public image. Our family was part of the black elite of Buckhead. To the outside world, we were the picture of excellence and generational wealth. Behind closed doors, however, I was the designated scapegoat. My mother, Vivian, is a narcissistic socialite obsessed with maintaining her image in Atlanta high society. She is ruthless and manipulative, always ensuring that our family appears flawless on the covers of local magazines. My father, Isaiah, presents himself as a polished, respectable patriarch, but he is secretly a coward with a massive underground gambling addiction that he hides from everyone. Then there is my younger sister, Jada. She is 29 years old and the undeniable golden child of the family. As a former Spelman College pageant queen, Jada is entitled, arrogant, and entirely financially dependent on the family wealth. She never had to work a single day in her life. Today was the reading of Grandmother Josephine's will. She was a self-made billionaire matriarch who founded a legendary cosmetics and spa empire specifically catering to women of color across the South. She started with a single small storefront and built a nationwide phenomenon through sheer willpower and brilliant business strategy. While my mother was busy forcing Jada into beauty pageants, my grandmother secretly mentored me. She taught me how to read balance sheets and analyze profit margins. She was the only person who recognized my intelligence. We were gathered at Lawyer Sterling's prestigious law firm in downtown Atlanta. He was Grandmother Josephine's ruthless and fiercely loyal executor. The heavy mahogany doors of his office loomed in front of us, creating a tense and suffocating atmosphere. I stood in the corridor holding a glass of ice water. I had taken the day off from my accounting firm to be here wearing a sensible charcoal gray suit. Before I could even reach for the brass door handle, my mother Vivian stepped directly in front of me, blocking my path. Vivian wore a tailored black morning dress that probably cost more than my car. Without warning, she violently snatched the water glass right out of my hand. The sudden aggressive movement sent freezing water splashing all over the front of my charcoal suit. I gasped as the cold liquid soaked through my blouse and chilled my skin. Vivian did not even blink. She shoved me backward by my shoulders, pushing me further into the corridor. "Wait in the hall," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Jada is trying to conceive and your negative energy is stressing her out. This is family business. You will just taint your grandmother's legacy by standing in there looking like a common secretary." I stood there dripping wet. My forensic accountant brain automatically calculated the cost of dry cleaning the suit, but my heart just felt the familiar sting of rejection. This was how my mother had treated me my entire life. I was always an inconvenience to her, an eyesore that threatened her perfect socialite image. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply wiped the water from my lapel with my bare hand. I turned around to walk away from the office and head back to the elevators. I was completely done trying to belong where I was clearly unwanted. I figured I would just call the lawyer later to get the details of whatever small token my grandmother might have left me. Just as I took my first step away, a cold and authoritative voice cut through the heavy silence of the corridor. "No, she has to be here." I stopped and turned back around. Lawyer Sterling stood in the doorway holding a thick legal file. He looked down at my mother over the rim of his glasses with absolute authority. "If Zara leaves this building, none of you get a single cent," he said evenly. He stepped aside, leaving the door wide open for me. Vivian's jaw clenched tightly, but she moved out of the way. I walked past her and stepped into the massive conference room, feeling a strange shift in the atmosphere. The room smelled of expensive leather and polished wood. My father Isaiah sat at the far end of the long table checking his expensive watch. Next to him sat my sister Jada. She crossed her legs as I sat down opposite her, looking me up and down with obvious disgust. "Look what dragged itself in," Jada sneered loudly, ensuring everyone could hear her. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at my damp suit. "Are you seriously wearing charity bin trash to grandmother's will reading? You look like a public defender. I guess you never outgrew your awkward phase." I ignored her entirely, but painful memories flooded my mind. I remembered being a teenager watching Jada get brand new seasonal wardrobes from luxury boutiques. Meanwhile, I was always handed her discarded out-of-style clothes. My mother used to say that since I did not have Jada's beauty, I did not need expensive fabrics to impress anyone. The unfairness of it all had shaped my entire youth. I was forced to wash dishes and work retail just to pay for my college tuition, while Jada received full financial support so she could focus on her pageant training. But today, I just sat quietly and waited for the proceedings to begin. My silence always irritated them more than any argument ever could. Lawyer Sterling took his seat at the head of the long table. He opened the thick leather-bound folder and adjusted his glasses. "We are here to execute the final wishes of Josephine," he began, his voice echoing in the large room. "As you all know, she built an empire from the ground up. Her assets are extensive and her instructions are very specific." Vivian leaned forward in her chair. Her eyes gleamed with undisguised greed. Jada mirrored her mother's posture, practically vibrating with anticipation. Sterling cleared his throat and began reading the specific allocations. "To my daughter-in-law, Vivian, and my granddaughter Jada, I leave the $8 million Buckhead estate, the collection of luxury vehicles, and a one-time cash payout of $10 million to be divided equally." The room erupted into absolute chaos. Vivian shrieked with joy, throwing her arms around Jada. They hugged and laughed, completely ignoring the solemnity of the occasion. $10 million, Jada squealed, clapping her hands together. "We are going to Paris, Mom." Vivian looked across the table at me with a triumphant and cruel smirk. She flipped her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. "Well, Zara, it looks like grandmother finally realized who the useless grandchild really was," Vivian said, her voice dripping with malice. "I suppose she did not want to waste her hard-earned money on someone who lives in a cramped apartment and crunches numbers for a living. Do not worry. Maybe we will hire you to do our taxes if you offer a family discount." My father. Isaiah chuckled softly, leaning back in his leather chair. He looked incredibly relieved. I knew he was glad to secure the funds to maintain his country club lifestyle and likely pay off whatever hidden gambling debts he had accumulated this month. Jada was already pulling out her phone, probably browsing designer catalogs, or texting her flashy art broker husband Terrence about the massive windfall. They were so consumed by their victory that they did not even notice Lawyer Sterling sitting perfectly still at the head of the table. He was watching them with a profound look of disgust on his face. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. My wetsuit was uncomfortable against my skin, but I refused to let them see me shiver. I had spent a lifetime building an impenetrable armor against their insults and their toxic behavior. I knew there had to be more to the story. Grandmother Josephine was a brilliant businesswoman who saw through everyone's facade. She knew exactly how Vivian and Isaiah operated. She knew how lazy and entitled Jada was. Vivian reached eagerly across the polished table, grabbing a gold-plated pen from the center tray. "Where do I sign, Sterling?" she demanded impatiently. "Let us get this paperwork filed so we can transfer the funds today. I have a major charity gala to plan, and I need to secure the catering deposit." As she brought the pen down to the signature line on the document, Sterling swiftly pulled the paper away from her reach. Vivian gasped in shock, holding the pen in midair. Sterling closed the folder with a loud, deliberate snap that echoed through the quiet room. "I apologize for the confusion, Vivian," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low and serious register. "You misunderstood the nature of the bequest." Vivian frowned deeply, her hand dropping back to the table. "Misunderstood what?" she asked sharply. "You just said the estate, the cars, and the $10 million go to us." "Yes," Sterling replied, adjusting his glasses and looking at her coldly. But those assets do not exist as liquid cash or direct property deeds. They belong entirely to a closed corporate trust that governs the entirety of the Josephine Cosmetics empire. All properties, vehicles, and capital are owned by the business entity itself. Vivian scoffed, rolling her eyes in annoyance. So what she said, waving her hand dismissively, "We are the named beneficiaries. Just give us the contact information for the trust manager so we can instruct them to release the funds to our personal accounts immediately." Sterling folded his hands on top of the leather folder. He looked directly into Vivian's eyes and delivered the final, devastating blow. "You cannot instruct the trust manager to do anything, Vivian," he stated clearly. "The sole trustee, the only person on this earth with the legal authority to sign the distribution checks, and the sole heir to 100% of the voting shares of Josephine Cosmetics is Zara." The silence that fell over the room was absolute and suffocating. It was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vent above us. Jada dropped her phone onto the table with a loud clatter. Her jaw went completely slack. Vivian's face contorted in sheer horror as the crushing reality of the situation crashed down on her. I turned my head slightly to look at my father. Isaiah's hands were trembling violently. The gold pen he had been holding slipped from his fingers and hit the hardwood floor. His face went completely white. Section 2, 500 words. The heavy gold pen hit the hardwood floor and rolled away. My father stared at me as if he had seen a ghost. My mother, Vivian, looked like she was going to faint. They had just realized that the $10 million and the massive Buckhead estate they thought were theirs actually belonged to a corporate trust. A trust that I completely controlled. I stood up, smoothed my charcoal gray suit, and walked out of the room. I knew my mother would not let this go easily. What I got instead was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Vivian completely flipped her script. My phone rang with a sweet voicemail from her. She acted as if the ugly confrontation in the hallway had never happened. She begged me to come to a family unity dinner at the Buckhead Country Club. I knew exactly what she was doing. I decided to attend just to see how far she would go. When I arrived at the prestigious country club, I was escorted to a private dining room dripping with crystal chandeliers and fresh white floral arrangements. Vivian had spared no expense. The dinner was easily a $50,000 spectacle. My parents were there along with Jada and her husband Terrence. Terrence was a flashy art broker who always wore suits that were a little too tight and cologne that was a little too strong. As soon as I sat down, Vivian slid a thick, legally binding document across the crisp white tablecloth toward me. It was a pre-drafted power of attorney. She smiled sweetly, reaching out to gently pat my hand. "Zara, sweetheart." Vivian purred, her voice dripping with fake affection. "We are all so proud of you, but running a billion-dollar empire is a massive burden. You are just a number cruncher. You work behind the scenes. We think it would be best to let a real businessman handle the corporate responsibilities. Terrence has the connections and the swagger to manage the trust. Just sign this and you will not have to worry about a thing." I stared at the document. They really thought I was stupid enough to hand over the keys to the kingdom. Before I could respond, the waiter arrived with our main courses. My father, Isaiah, took the serving platter to distribute the food. He placed a massive sizzling prime cut of Wagyu steak directly onto Jada's plate. He gave Terrence a similar portion. Then he picked up a small bowl of plain wilted salad and pushed it across the table toward me. He did not even bother offering me any meat. "You are used to fending for yourself, Zara," Isaiah said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Just like when you washed dishes to pay for your college classes so Jada could focus on her pageant training. You have always been the resilient one. A little salad is fine for you tonight." The blatant disrespect was breathtaking. They were literally trying to steal a billion-dollar empire from me while simultaneously treating me like a second-class citizen at the dinner table. Jada smirked and cut a piece of her expensive steak. She chewed slowly, looking at me with absolute contempt. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her luxurious lifestyle was currently resting entirely in my hands. I did not touch the salad. I calmly reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick financial dossier. I had spent the afternoon running a deep background check on Terrence using my specialized forensic accounting software. When you investigate corporate wire fraud for a living, tracking down hidden debt is child's play. I tossed the heavy folder onto the center of the dining table. It landed with a loud thud right next to Vivian's power of attorney document. "What is this?" Terrence asked, his confident smile faltering slightly. I looked him dead in the eye. "That is your reality, Terrence," I said smoothly. "You want to manage $1 billion trust, but you cannot even manage your own bank accounts." I opened the folder and spread the documents out for everyone to see. Vivian and Isaiah leaned in closely, while Jada looked confused. I pointed to the first highlighted page. "Your high-end art brokerage is failing miserably, Terrence. You have not sold a legitimate piece of art in 8 months, but you have been taking out massive unrecorded loans." I tapped another piece of paper. "According to these wire transfers, you currently owe $3 million to some very dangerous loan sharks operating out of Miami, and all 4 of your premium credit cards are completely maxed out. You are drowning in debt, and you thought you could use my grandmother's trust fund to bail yourself out." Terrence's face turned a sickening shade of gray. He looked like he was going to throw up. Jada dropped her fork, her voice pitched up in panic. "Terrence, what is she talking about? Is this true?" Before Terrence could formulate a lie, the heavy oak doors of the private dining room opened. The country club general manager walked in looking incredibly uncomfortable. He walked straight past my parents and approached Terrence. He held out a sleek black leather billfold. "Excuse me, sir," the manager said, his voice tight with embarrassment. "We tried to process the deposit for this evening's $50,000 dinner event, but your credit card was declined. We tried 2 other cards on your file and they were also rejected. We need an alternative form of payment immediately, or I will have to call security." The silence in the room was absolute. Vivian gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Isaiah looked away in shame. Jada stared at her husband with wide, horrified eyes. The facade of their perfect, wealthy life was crumbling right in front of them. Terrence scrambled out of his chair, patting his pockets frantically, as if a magical pile of cash would suddenly appear. I slowly stood up from the table. I picked up my briefcase and looked at my mother. "It looks like you will need to find another way to pay for this little family unity dinner, Vivian," I said calmly. "I suggest you start washing dishes. You know, just like I did." I turned and walked out of the private dining room, leaving them in a state of complete humiliation. The sound of Jada screaming at Terrence echoed down the long marble hallway. I felt a massive surge of satisfaction, but I knew this was only the beginning of their desperation. As I stepped out of the country club into the warm Atlanta night air, I handed my ticket to the valet. I stood under the grand portico waiting for my car. Suddenly, heavy footsteps approached from behind. Terrence stormed out of the club, his face flushed with extreme anger and desperation. He marched right up to me, and instead of apologizing for trying to steal my inheritance, he trapped me against a large stone pillar. He boxed me in, placing both his hands on the cold stone right beside my head. He leaned in close, his expensive cologne mixing with the smell of sweat and sheer panic. "Listen to me, Zara," Terrence whispered, his voice frantic, but laced with a disgusting, suggestive tone. "You are a very smart woman. We do not need the rest of them. You give me a slice of that trust fund and I will dump my idiot wife Jada tonight. I know you have always been jealous of her beauty. We could be real partners. Just the 2 of us running this massive cosmetic empire together. Think about it. You and me taking over the city. We could travel the world. You would never be second best again. I can give you exactly what you always wanted." I looked at him with absolutely no emotion. He was a miserable parasite willing to abandon his pregnant wife the second her money dried up. I did not yell or push him away. I remained completely deadpan, staring right through him. I casually reached into the pocket of my tailored slacks and pulled out my cell phone. The screen was brightly lit, showing an active voice recording application with the timer ticking upward. I tapped the screen once, stopping the recording instantly. "Save to cloud," I said, my voice perfectly steady and incredibly cold. "Your voice sounds incredibly clear on this recording, Terrence. I am sure Jada will absolutely love hearing exactly what her loving and faithful husband truly thinks of her." Terrence stumbled backward, his eyes wide with sheer terror. He realized he had just handed me the very weapon I needed to destroy his fragile marriage. My sleek black car pulled up to the curb. I stepped away from the pillar, climbed into the driver's seat, and left him standing there, trembling alone in the dark. I drove away knowing the real war had just begun. The real war had just begun. By the time the bright morning sun rose over the sprawling Atlanta skyline, the next day, my mother had already launched her vicious counterattack. I was sitting at the polished marble kitchen island in my downtown penthouse, sipping black coffee when my phone exploded with endless notifications. My executive assistant texted me an audio link with an urgent message warning me to listen immediately. I clicked the provided link, and the polished, aggressively sympathetic voice of Atlanta's most popular society podcast host filled my quiet kitchen. The broadcast show was an absolute staple for the city elite. It was a digital courtroom where pristine reputations were either built up to the sky or brutally destroyed in seconds. Today, the special featured guests were Vivian and Jada. I listened in cold silence as my mother wove a masterful, tearful lie. Her voice trembled with perfectly practiced heartbreak. She told the famous podcast host that her beloved mother-in-law Josephine had been suffering from severe undiagnosed dementia during her final months on Earth. Then Vivian dropped the ultimate devastating accusation. She claimed that I had intentionally isolated my grandmother, manipulated her failing mind, and violently forced her to sign over the entire corporate trust to me alone. Jada chimed in right on cue, playing the devastated innocent granddaughter. She cried into the expensive microphone, describing how she had been robbed of her rightful legacy by an older sister who was completely consumed with bitter jealousy. They painted me as a cold, calculated monster guilty of horrific elder abuse. They knew exactly how to play the unforgiving court of public opinion. In our exclusive social circle, reputation was the ultimate currency, and they were trying to bankrupt me permanently. The rapid fallout from the podcast broadcast was instantaneous and absolutely brutal. When I walked into the sleek glass lobby of my independent accounting firm an hour later, the office phones were ringing off the hook. My receptionist looked completely frantic as she handed me a towering stack of urgent printed messages. As a top-tier forensic accountant, my entire professional career was built on a solid foundation of impeccable integrity and absolute trust. Now, high-profile corporate clients were calling in a massive panic to cancel their highly lucrative contracts. They simply could not afford to be financially associated with an investigator publicly accused of defrauding her own elderly grandmother. By noon, I had lost 3 major accounts, resulting in millions of dollars in projected revenue evaporating into thin air. My senior business partners were pacing the carpeted floors in a state of sheer panic, but I remained completely calm and focused. I knew exactly what my mother was doing. She was trying to starve me out financially. She thought that if she utterly destroyed my professional life, I would eventually come crawling back to her and surrender the billion-dollar trust fund just to survive. She severely underestimated my mental resilience and my limitless capacity for tactical retaliation. Just as I was drafting a ruthless legal cease and desist order, my personal cell phone rang loudly. It was my father, Isaiah. His voice sounded remarkably frail and desperate, which was a sharp, jarring contrast to the arrogant man who had offered me a plate of plain salad the night before. He begged me to meet him at an empty cafe located on the quiet industrial edge of the city. He frantically stated it was a critical matter of life and death. I knew instantly it was a manipulative trap designed to break my resolve, but as a seasoned forensic investigator, I also knew that you always let the guilty suspect talk so they can dig their own grave. I agreed to meet him at the designated location. The corner cafe was exceptionally quiet, with only a few elderly patrons scattered at the small corner tables. Isaiah was sitting in a dark leather booth wearing a rumpled brown trench coat and looking exactly like a man on the absolute edge of a complete nervous breakdown. I sat down directly across from him and placed my heavy leather briefcase squarely on the wooden table. He immediately reached across the surface and tried to grab my hands in a show of affection. I pulled them back swiftly, folding them neatly and securely in my lap. I stared at him with no emotion, waiting patiently for the inevitable theatrical performance to begin. Isaiah looked at me with bloodshot, tired eyes and launched into his desperate psychological ploy. He played the role of the loving, terrified father absolutely perfectly. He told me that Vivian was completely unhinged by the massive public backlash of the will reading and was currently threatening to take her own life. He painted a highly tragic picture of a wonderful family falling apart because of a simple, unfortunate misunderstanding over money. He dramatically wiped away a fake tear and told me how much he loved me and how he had always tried his best to protect me from my mother's exceptionally harsh criticism. It was a sickening display of emotional manipulation, but I let him continue his monologue without interrupting him. Then he finally got to the real point of the secret meeting. He leaned in incredibly close, his voice dropping to a frantic, rushed whisper. He demanded that I sign a $5 million certified check from the corporate trust immediately. He claimed the family commercial real estate investments were failing rapidly due to an unexpected housing market crash. According to his fabricated story, without a massive cash injection, everything they owned would be foreclosed by the central bank by the end of the current week. He promised that it was just a short-term emergency loan and that he would pay back every single cent to the trust once the properties were successfully sold. He looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, waiting for me to break down emotionally and hand over the money to save my family from financial ruin. I sat perfectly still, analyzing his pathetic lies. My forensic accounting software had already flagged highly unusual offshore routing numbers connected directly to his personal bank accounts. I knew for a fact he was not losing money in real estate. But before I could expose his hidden financial crimes, the heavy glass door of the cafe swung open with a loud, shattering crash. Jada stormed into the quiet establishment like a dangerous hurricane of pure, unadulterated rage. She was wearing tight designer activewear and oversized black sunglasses, marching straight toward our specific booth. Her face was contorted with absolute screaming fury. The few patrons sitting in the cafe turned their heads quickly to watch the dramatic commotion unfold. My father looked up in complete shock, clearly not expecting his beautiful golden child to violently interrupt his carefully planned extortion attempt. I remained seated calmly, watching my sister approach with a calculated, assessing gaze. Before I could even speak a single word, Jada lunged dangerously across the small table. Her right hand swung violently through the air and struck my cheek with a resounding, sickening crack. The sharp, explosive sound of the slap echoed loudly through the entire cafe. The fierce sting radiated hotly across my face, but I did not flinch or retreat. I did not raise my hand to touch my burning cheek. I just locked my eyes coldly with hers as she stood over me, breathing heavily like a wild animal. "You stole my inheritance and now you are trying to seduce my husband," Jada screamed hysterically, pointing a wildly trembling manicured finger right in my face. "You are a disgusting, desperate monster. Terrence told me everything about you. He told me how you aggressively cornered him at the country club valet last night and begged him to leave me. You offered him a massive slice of the trust fund if he would sleep with you. You have always been terribly jealous of me, and now you are trying to ruin my perfect marriage, because nobody has ever loved you." She stood there, her chest heaving violently, publicly accusing me of propositioning the very man who had tried to extort me just hours prior. I watched the frantic desperation in her eyes, and I realized what had happened behind closed doors. Terrence knew his massive debts were going to be exposed soon. He knew I had the audio recording that would destroy his life of luxury. So he decided to strike first. He went home and fed Jada a web of lies to protect himself. He convinced her I was the villain attempting to ruin their union. Jada was so dependent on her false reality, she swallowed his story without a single moment of hesitation. She needed someone to blame for her crumbling existence, and I was the easiest target. I looked at my father, who was trembling in his booth, knowing his pathetic extortion plan had been completely derailed forever. Jada stood there panting heavily with her chest rising and falling. She wanted a fight, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself against her ridiculous accusations regarding Terrence. I simply reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. I placed it neatly on the wooden table right in front of my father to pay for the black coffee I had barely touched. Then I calmly picked up a white paper napkin and slowly wiped my stinging cheek. The skin was burning hotly from her aggressive strike, but my facial expression remained entirely blank and unbothered. I looked at my father, Isaiah, who was still sitting frozen in the dark leather booth. He knew his desperate attempt to secure a $5 million check was entirely ruined. I picked up my heavy leather briefcase and stepped out of the booth. I did not say a single word to her. I simply turned around and walked out of the cafe, leaving my father and my sister to deal with their miserable public meltdown all by themselves. As I stepped into the bright Atlanta sunlight, my mind was racing with razor-sharp clarity. The physical pain in my cheek was completely overshadowed by my relentless professional curiosity. I knew with absolute certainty that his elaborate story about failing commercial real estate investments was a complete fabrication. I climbed into my car and drove straight to the corporate headquarters of Josephine Cosmetics, located in the heart of the city business district. As the sole trustee of the corporate trust, the security guards at the front desk immediately granted me full access to the executive floors. I bypassed my grandmother's grand corner suite and walked directly toward the smaller adjoining office that my father had occupied for the last 15 years. I sat down in his luxurious leather executive chair and woke up his desktop computer. A secure login screen immediately popped up demanding a complex password. As an elite forensic accountant, dealing with corporate firewalls was my daily specialty. I opened my briefcase and retrieved a highly specialized encrypted flash drive containing my proprietary investigation software. I plugged the small device directly into the computer tower and let my program run its course. Within minutes, the software aggressively bypassed the network security protocols and granted me full administrative access to his entire hard drive. I instructed my software to execute a deep system recovery scan. I wanted every deleted file, every hidden folder, and every scrubbed cache data from the past decade. I opened the first hidden folder, and my eyes narrowed as I began scanning the intricate spreadsheets. The numbers told a terrifying and undeniable story. I spent the next 2 hours meticulously tracing the complex web of hidden financial transactions. My father did not have a single failing real estate investment in Atlanta or anywhere else. He had been systematically embezzling millions of dollars from his own mother and her company for an entire decade. But stealing the money was only the first part of his massive criminal enterprise. He needed a way to clean the stolen funds before he could use them. I traced the recovered offshore routing numbers and matched them against recent bank transfers. The money trail did not lead to a tropical island or a Swiss bank account. The stolen millions were being directly funneled right back into the local economy through a very specific and familiar business entity. The routing numbers matched the exact financial accounts belonging to Terrence and his high-end art gallery. His entire gallery operation was nothing but an elaborate, sophisticated front to launder my father's stolen millions. Terrence would create fake invoices for non-existent abstract paintings and expensive sculptures, effectively washing the dirty corporate money through his business. But what was my father doing with millions of dollars in untraceable cash? I dug deeper into the recovered personal ledgers and finally found the devastating answer. Isaiah had a massive underground gambling addiction that far exceeded anything I could have ever imagined. He was deeply indebted to highly dangerous illegal gambling syndicates operating across the East Coast. He had been borrowing millions from ruthless loan sharks and then embezzling from my grandmother to pay off his massive losses. When my grandmother passed away and I was named the sole trustee, his entire financial supply line was abruptly cut off. That was exactly why Terrence was suddenly drowning in $3 million of immediate debt, and that was exactly why my father was begging for a $5 million check today. They were criminal partners terrified of the dangerous people coming to collect their money. I hit the print command on the computer and watched as the machine spit out 50 pages of undeniable damning evidence. Every wire transfer, every fake invoice, and every offshore routing number was beautifully documented on crisp white paper. I neatly gathered the stack of documents and placed them securely inside my briefcase. I left the corporate headquarters and drove my car straight to my parents' sprawling mansion in the exclusive Buckhead neighborhood. They had played me for a fool, but I was about to burn their entire criminal empire to the ground. It was time to stop playing defense. I parked in the circular driveway and marched right up to the massive double front doors. I did not bother knocking. I used my old key to unlock the door and stepped into the grand marble foyer. The house was quiet, but I could hear the faint sound of pacing footsteps coming from the kitchen area. I walked down the wide hallway and entered the massive gourmet kitchen. My father was pacing nervously back and forth across the polished hardwood floor, still wearing the rumpled brown trench coat from our meeting at the cafe. He looked up when I entered, his eyes widening in sheer panic. "Zara," he stammered, taking a step backward. "What are you doing here? You need to leave right now." I did not say a word. I unclasped my briefcase and pulled out the thick stack of printed financial documents. I raised my arm and threw the heavy pile of evidence directly onto the massive marble kitchen island. The papers fanned out across the smooth surface, displaying his countless financial crimes for him to see. "I know exactly what you did, Isaiah," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the large room. "There are no failing real estate investments. You have been embezzling millions from grandmother Josephine for 10 years. You used Terrence and his fake art gallery to launder the stolen cash. And you burned every single cent feeding your pathetic underground gambling addiction. The loan sharks are coming for both of you, and you thought you could use my trust fund to save your own life." My father stared at the documents covering the marble island. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed by the undeniable proof of his massive criminal enterprise. He was just a cowardly thief who had stolen from his own mother. Suddenly, the soft click of designer heels echoed from the dark, formal living room adjacent to the kitchen. I turned my head slightly as Vivian stepped out from the deep shadows. She looked incredibly relaxed, completely unbothered by the heavy tension suffocating the kitchen. She took a slow, casual sip of her drink and looked at the financial documents scattered across the island. "You think I did not know?" Zara, Vivian asked, her voice completely smooth and dripping with arrogant confidence. "You think I am some clueless housewife who just spends money at the country club all day? I have known about his pathetic little embezzlement scheme for 8 years." My father looked at her in absolute shock, his hands trembling wildly as he realized the truth. Vivian smiled coldly and casually swirled the small green olive around in her expensive crystal martini glass. "I found his hidden accounts years ago," she continued, walking slowly toward the marble island. "But I could not let my husband go to federal prison and ruin my perfect social standing in this city. I could not let the high society wives look down on me. So I fixed his mess. I am the one who altered the corporate accounting books. And I am the one who framed your favorite Aunt Sharon for the missing funds, so your father would not go to prison." Aunt Sharon was the only person in this family who ever showed me genuine kindness, and Vivian had mercilessly destroyed her career just to protect a gambling addict. She had sacrificed an innocent woman without a single second thought just to maintain her fake upper-class image among her wealthy friends. My blood ran completely cold as I stood there silently and stared directly at her deeply smug and perfectly smiling face. She had framed Aunt Sharon without a single shred of remorse. The sheer malice radiating from my mother was breathtaking. She poured herself another splash of gin and walked toward the kitchen island. She looked at the printed evidence of my father's financial crimes and simply swept the papers off the marble counter. The documents fluttered to the hardwood floor like dead leaves. She looked at me with absolute contempt and told me to get out of her house. I did not argue. I had what I needed. I picked up my empty briefcase and walked out the front door. The battle lines were officially drawn. I knew my parents would not go down without a massive legal fight. They had millions of stolen dollars to protect and a flawless public image to maintain. I spent the next 3 days preparing my legal team for a relentless assault. Sure enough, my parents struck back with shocking ferocity. Realizing that I could not be emotionally manipulated or financially blackmailed, Vivian and Isaiah hired the most ruthless and expensive probate attorney in Atlanta. They bypassed standard negotiations and filed an aggressive emergency petition in the county probate court. Their legal strategy was as vicious as it was fabricated. They petitioned the court to have me officially declared mentally unfit to manage grandmother Josephine's billion-dollar corporate trust. They wanted the judge to strip me of my trustee status and hand total financial control back to them. I sat at the heavy oak defense table inside the Grand Atlanta courthouse, wearing a sharp navy blue suit. My posture was perfectly straight, and my expression was entirely unreadable. Across the wide aisle, my parents sat with their high-priced legal team. Vivian wore a conservative black dress, playing the role of the deeply concerned and grieving mother. Isaiah looked solemn and distinguished. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and my sister Jada confidently marched down the center aisle. She was their star witness. She strutted to the witness stand, wearing a tailored white designer dress, looking exactly like the pampered golden child she had always been. Jada took the sacred oath and sat down. Her performance was sickeningly perfect. She began crying softly into a tissue as her attorney asked her questions about my mental stability. Jada committed blatant aggressive perjury right under the nose of the judge. She claimed I was a deeply disturbed and dangerously erratic individual who had spent years harboring violent jealousy toward our family. Then she pulled out her ultimate weapon. Her lawyer submitted a sealed medical folder into evidence. It contained my private psychiatric records from when I was exactly 18 years old. Jada looked at the judge with wide, innocent eyes. She testified that I had suffered a severe mental breakdown and required intense psychiatric therapy for major depression. She claimed my brain was fundamentally broken and that I was completely incapable of handling the stress of a massive corporate empire. She painted a picture of a deranged and unstable sister who posed a massive financial threat to the family legacy. I sat there listening to her weaponize the darkest period of my entire life. Jada conveniently left out the actual reason I had fallen into that deep teenage depression. When I was 18 years old, Vivian and Isaiah had literally thrown me out of the house on Christmas Eve. They packed my few belongings in garbage bags and kicked me out into the freezing rain. Why? Because Jada needed my bedroom to expand her massive custom wardrobe closet for her upcoming statewide beauty pageant. That cruel abandonment forced me into intense therapy. Now they were maliciously using the very trauma they had caused to steal my inheritance. My lead attorney stood up from his chair. He was a brilliant and ruthless litigator who despised family bullies. He walked slowly toward the center of the courtroom carrying a small digital audio device. He addressed the judge with absolute professional calm. He stated that the petitioners had painted a picture of me as a jealous, unhinged spinster who was desperately obsessed with destroying her sister's perfect marriage. He noted that Jada had publicly accused me of trying to seduce her husband Terrence. He asked the judge for permission to submit one single piece of audio evidence to establish the true character dynamics of our family. The judge nodded and my lawyer pressed a button on the device. Terrence's frantic and arrogant voice echoed loudly through the silent courtroom. The high-quality recording played his disgusting proposition perfectly. Everyone heard him trap me against the stone pillar at the country club. Everyone heard him promise to dump his idiot wife Jada if I would just give him a slice of the trust fund. Everyone heard him outline his pathetic fantasy of the two of us running the cosmetic empire together and leaving his pregnant wife with nothing. The entire courtroom went absolutely dead silent. The audio recording completely annihilated Jada's false narrative. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was not a jealous, unhinged sister trying to destroy her marriage. It proved that her husband was a greedy, disloyal parasite who was actively trying to betray her for a quick payout. I looked across the aisle at my parents. Vivian's face was completely drained of color. Isaiah buried his face in his hands. They knew their entire legal strategy had just been blown to pieces by a single audio file. I turned my gaze toward the witness stand, expecting to see my sister completely break down. I expected Jada to realize that the man she married was a treacherous monster. I expected her to finally see the truth and direct her righteous anger at the husband who was ready to trade her in for a larger bank account. But I severely underestimated the sheer depth of her absolute delusion. The golden child did not turn her wrath on Terrence. Instead, she snapped completely. Jada slammed her hands down on the wooden witness stand and leaped to her feet. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She glared directly at me with a wild and unhinged look in her eyes. "You are a hideous, unlovable spinster!" Jada screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with hysterical rage. "You doctored that tape to destroy my marriage. You have always hated me because I am beautiful and you are nothing. You faked that audio because nobody has ever wanted you." She began sobbing violently and pointing her manicured finger at me, thrashing against the wooden railing of the witness stand. The sheer volume of her screaming echoed off the high ceiling. The gallery erupted into shocked whispers and murmurs. Vivian stood up and tried to rush the stand to calm her favorite daughter down, but the court bailiffs immediately stepped forward to block her path. Complete and utter chaos swallowed the room. Jada continued to shriek and throw a massive childish tantrum, completely ignoring the clear and undeniable reality of her husband's betrayal. She chose to protect her fragile ego by attacking me, rather than facing the painful truth about her pathetic marriage. The judge was furious. His face turned a deep shade of crimson as he watched the elite family completely devolve into a screaming match in his respectable courtroom. He grabbed his heavy wooden gavel and began banging it violently against his elevated desk. The sharp cracking sound cut through the wild noise of Jada's hysterical sobbing and the loud overlapping arguments of the expensive attorneys. "Order in my court," the judge bellowed angrily, silencing the room instantly. He glared down at us with profound exhaustion. He stated that this was the most chaotic family dispute he had seen in his entire career. He declared that he could not make a sound ruling on my mental fitness while the family was actively engaging in public warfare. He needed more time to review the audio recording, the medical files, and the overall corporate environment. Therefore, he announced his immediate ruling. He slammed his gavel down one final time. He officially ordered a temporary emergency freeze on all access to the Josephine Cosmetics Trust funds. He ruled that neither I nor my parents nor any other family member could access a single dollar of the estate until a thorough and independent judicial review was fully completed. The massive billion-dollar empire was completely locked down. The judge stood up and stormed out of the courtroom, leaving us standing in the tense silence. I looked at my family across the wide center aisle of the courtroom. The money was frozen, but the war was far from over. This delay was just the calm before the devastating storm hit. I walked away knowing that I had the ultimate power to completely destroy their pathetic lives forever and ever without mercy. The judge freezing the trust funds was a minor temporary setback for my daily life, but it was an absolute immediate death sentence for Terrence and my father. With the cosmetic empire locked down by the probate court, their secret pipeline of illicit cash was violently severed. Isaiah could no longer funnel embezzled corporate funds through the fake art gallery, and Terrence suddenly found himself standing exposed to the dangerous Miami loan sharks. The criminal syndicate did not care about family courtroom drama. They wanted their $3 million immediately. The financial squeeze hit Terrence hard. His luxury vehicles were repossessed in the middle of the night. With no legitimate income and the loan sharks issuing severe threats, Terrence turned into a scavenger. Jada possessed a massive collection of high jewelry and designer handbags funded entirely by my father's stolen money. Terrence waited until Jada left for her spa appointments and began emptying her hidden wall safe. He smuggled them out in duffels and pawned them at shady underground dealers for pennies on the dollar to make minimum interest payments to the cartel. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Jada returned home early from a canceled luncheon. She walked into their lavish master suite and found Terrence frantically stuffing her custom emerald necklace into his jacket pocket. The heavy steel door of her personal safe was hanging wide open. Jada immediately realized that her loving husband was robbing her blind. She screamed at him, demanding her jewelry back. She threatened to call the police and tell my father. But Terrence was no longer the slick, charming art broker trying to play the part of a supportive husband. When Jada reached for her cell phone to call for help, Terrence snapped completely. He lunged across the bedroom and ripped the phone from her hands. He shoved her violently against the heavy mahogany dresser. Jada tried to fight back, but Terrence struck her across the face with brutal force. The impact sent her crashing to the hardwood floor. Terrence began tearing through the room looking for more valuables to steal, completely ignoring his wife crying on the floor. Jada managed to crawl out of the bedroom and sprint down the long hallway. She locked herself inside the marble guest bathroom, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs. She tried to use her smartwatch to call her rich socialite friends, but they all ignored her. She tried calling our mother Vivian, but the call went straight to voicemail. Having completely alienated everyone else in her life, Jada had only one person left to call. I was sitting in my downtown office reviewing financial ledgers when my private secure line rang. I answered and heard Jada sobbing hysterically through the speaker. She begged me to help her. She cried that Terrence was destroying the house and that he had physically attacked her. I immediately dialed the emergency police dispatcher, reported an active domestic violence situation, and sprinted to my car. I drove recklessly through the Atlanta traffic and pulled up to their massive gated mansion. Two police cruisers were already parked in the circular driveway. I rushed toward the front door expecting to see Terrence in handcuffs. Instead, I saw the two uniformed police officers calmly walking down the front steps. And standing right there in the open doorway, waving goodbye to the cops, with a polite practiced smile, was my mother. I marched up the stone steps and demanded to know why the police were leaving without arresting Terrence. Vivian grabbed my arm and yanked me inside, slamming the heavy door shut behind us. She glared at me with absolute fury. She had intercepted the police at the door and deployed her ultimate weapon. She used her elite social status and a massive envelope of untraceable cash to convince the responding officers that it was just a loud verbal disagreement. She paid off the police to walk away without filing a single report. I shoved past my mother and walked straight into the formal living room. The sight before me was absolutely sickening. Jada was sitting on a velvet sofa, trembling softly, holding a bloody towel to her split lip. And Vivian, the mother who claimed to fiercely love and protect her golden child, was standing over her holding an expensive palette of heavy theatrical concealer. Terrence was sitting in a leather armchair across the room, looking completely unbothered, pouring himself a glass of scotch. Vivian dipped a makeup sponge into the concealer and aggressively dabbed it onto Jada's bruised face. "Keep your head still, Jada," Vivian commanded sharply, showing absolutely zero compassion for her battered daughter. "You are going to keep your mouth shut, and you are going to bear it like a strong woman. The annual Atlanta Charity Gala is this weekend. We are receiving the Legacy Family of the Year award. We cannot afford a domestic violence scandal right now. You will put on a brave face, you will stand next to your husband, and you will smile for the cameras. Do you understand me?" I stared at Vivian in pure, unfiltered horror. She was actively protecting a violent criminal who was robbing her daughter just to preserve a fake social image. She was forcing Jada to swallow her trauma and stand beside her abuser because a public scandal would ruin Vivian's perfect high society reputation. She cared more about a meaningless plastic trophy at a charity dinner than the physical safety of her own pregnant child. Jada looked up at me with tear-filled, desperate eyes. "Zara, please." Jada whimpered softly, her voice shaking. "Help me get rid of him." I stood my ground and looked down at the sister who had committed perjury to destroy my life just days prior. "I will help you, Jada," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "I will hire my private security team to throw Terrence out of this house tonight. I will use my lawyers to completely destroy him and shield you from his criminal debts. But I will only do it on one strict condition. You must leave this house right now, go straight to the police station, and file a formal assault report. And then you must stand up in the probate court and testify to the absolute truth. You must admit that you committed perjury. You must confess that Vivian and Isaiah orchestrated the entire legal ambush, and you must tell the judge that I am perfectly fit to run the trust." Vivian stopped applying the makeup. She glared at me like I was the devil incarnate. "Do not listen to her, Jada," Vivian hissed venomously. "If you go to the police, the media will devour us. Your reputation in Buckhead will be permanently ruined. No respectable man in Atlanta will ever look at you again. You will lose your entire social standing." I kept my eyes locked on my sister, waiting for her to finally break free from our mother's toxic control. But the intense fear of losing her precious social status was simply too strong. The golden child had been conditioned her entire life to value public perception above everything else, including her own safety. Jada looked at the mirror, examining the heavy concealer covering her painful bruise. She looked at Vivian's commanding glare. Then she looked down at the expensive marble floor, refusing to make eye contact with me. "I cannot lose my status, Zara," Jada whispered quietly, fresh tears ruining the fresh makeup. "I cannot be a public embarrassment. I am staying with my husband." Finality washed over me. I had given her a chance at redemption, and she chose the illusion of prestige over the reality of her own survival. I am leaving, I said, turning my back on the pathetic scene in the living room. Have fun at the charity gala, Jada. I hope the legacy award is worth the pain. I walked out of the mansion and drove back to my penthouse. The family was cannibalizing itself from the inside out. They were rotting under the immense pressure of their own greed and vanity. I went to bed knowing that my enemies were busy destroying each other. That night, at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, my secure private phone rang loudly in the dark bedroom. I sat up quickly and answered the call. Lawyer Sterling was on the other end of the line. His normally stoic voice sounded incredibly urgent and tense. Zara, Sterling said firmly, without any pleasantries or introductions. The legal timer on the Swiss safety deposit box just expired. Get dressed and meet me at the private bank vault immediately. It is time to retrieve the nuclear code your grandmother left for you. The ultimate truth about this entire family is securely locked inside that metal box. We have absolutely no time to waste. I will be waiting for you by the main entrance. Do not let anyone follow you tonight. The final game has begun. I threw off my silk sleepwear and dressed in a structured black suit. I sped through the empty streets of downtown Atlanta. The rain had cleared, leaving the asphalt reflecting the amber streetlights. My mind raced, but my heart remained calm. I pulled up to the imposing granite facade of the secure private depository just as Lawyer Sterling stepped out of his black car. He gave me a curt nod and gestured for me to follow. The depository was a fortress designed exclusively for the ultra-wealthy. We bypassed the empty reception area and walked directly to a reinforced elevator. Sterling scanned his retina and punched in a complex access code. The elevator descended deep underground. We stepped out into a sterile white corridor lined with armed security personnel who recognized Sterling instantly. We were escorted into a secure private viewing room containing nothing but a stainless steel table and a single laptop computer. A senior vault manager entered the room carrying a heavy titanium lockbox. He placed it carefully on the table and handed Sterling a pair of white cotton gloves. Sterling looked at me with an expression of profound gravity. Your grandmother instructed me to release this box to you only after the family attempted to legally challenge your authority, he said quietly. She knew they would file a probate petition. She anticipated their exact legal strategy. This is your inheritance, Zara. Not money, but truth. Sterling slid the heavy metal box across the polished table toward me. I reached out and unlatched the dual locks. The heavy lid popped open with a metallic click. I looked inside expecting to find offshore bank accounts or hidden property deeds. Instead, the velvet-lined interior was almost completely empty. There was no money. There were no stock certificates or corporate bonds. There were only two specific items resting at the bottom of the box. The first item was a sleek silver flash drive. The second item was a thick sealed medical file. The manila envelope was noticeably yellowed around the edges, clearly showing its extreme age. A bold red stamp across the front seal displayed a date from exactly 29 years ago. I reached into the box and picked up the silver flash drive. I plugged the small device directly into the provided laptop on the table. A single video file appeared on the high-resolution screen. I took a deep breath and clicked play. The screen flickered to life, and Grandmother Josephine appeared. She was sitting in her legendary corner office overlooking the city. She looked frail, indicating this was recorded just weeks before her passing, but her dark eyes blazed with the same fierce, terrifying intelligence that had built her massive cosmetic empire. "Hello, Zara," my grandmother said, her rich voice filling the quiet viewing room. "If you are watching this, it means your mother and father have officially taken the bait. It means they have dragged you into a courtroom and tried to destroy your reputation to steal my wealth. I am recording this message because I need you to understand that you were never abandoned. I was always watching." I leaned closer to the screen, completely captivated by her commanding presence. My grandmother leaned forward in her executive chair. "I knew everything, Zara," she stated with absolute chilling certainty. "I knew about your father Isaiah and his pathetic underground gambling addiction. I knew he was systematically embezzling millions of dollars from my company for an entire decade. I let him think he was getting away with it because I was quietly tracing every single stolen dollar to build an undeniable federal case against him." She paused, and a look of pure disgust crossed her sharp features. "And Vivian?" She continued, her tone dripping with venom. I knew Vivian framed your innocent Aunt Sharon to protect Isaiah from prison. I knew she paid off auditors and altered corporate ledgers. But the absolute worst crime they ever committed was how they treated you. I saw them crop you out of photos. I saw them throw you out into the rain on Christmas Eve. I watched them lavish affection on Jada while treating my brilliant grandchild like a servant. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. My grandmother had known. She had seen my pain, and she had secretly validated my worth. She looked directly into the camera lens with a proud, fierce smile. "I did not leave you the corporate trust just to make you rich, Zara," she said firmly. "I left it to you to force their hand. I intentionally set up this legal trap. I knew freezing the trust would cut off their illicit cash supply. I knew desperation would make them careless and violent. I engineered this entire situation to force them to expose their true malicious nature to the world. I have given you the ultimate corporate power, but the documents inside that envelope will give you the ultimate social power. You are the only one smart enough and strong enough to execute this final judgment. Do not show them an ounce of mercy. Burn their fake kingdom to the ground." The video faded to black. I sat back in the metal chair, my heart pounding against my ribs with intense rhythmic force. Grandmother Josephine had orchestrated an absolute masterclass in psychological warfare from beyond the grave. She had made me the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner. I slowly reached into the metal lockbox and picked up the yellowed manila envelope. The paper was fragile and brittle beneath my fingertips. The red ink stamp glared back at me, verifying the date from 29 years ago. I broke the heavy wax seal and carefully slid the stack of vintage clinical documents out onto the table. They were official medical records from a private maternity clinic located on the outskirts of Atlanta. I flipped past the cover pages and scanned the detailed laboratory reports. My forensic training allowed me to instantly comprehend the complex medical terminology and the genetic testing matrices. I read the final clinical conclusion highlighted at the bottom of the third page. My hands began to tremble violently. A sudden sharp gasp escaped my lips as the colossal magnitude of the family secret hit me like a speeding freight train. The ultimate secret of our supposedly perfect high society family was right here in my hands. The documents contained absolute undeniable genetic proof regarding Jada. My mother Vivian had built her entire socialite persona around her flawless marriage to a wealthy cosmetics heir. She had paraded Jada around as the ultimate prize, the golden child who represented the absolute pinnacle of our generational wealth. But the clinical records proved the exact opposite. Jada was not the biological child of Isaiah. The genetic markers were completely incompatible. The golden child, the pageant queen who had tormented me for my entire existence, was the direct product of a secret illicit affair. Vivian had committed the ultimate betrayal, and then forced my father to spend his life blindly funding the luxurious lifestyle of another man's child. She had used my grandmother's wealth to pamper an illegitimate heir while viciously abusing the only true biological granddaughter in the family. The sheer scale of Vivian's hypocrisy was absolutely staggering. I carefully placed the documents back into the yellow envelope. I had the nuclear code. I had the power to instantly incinerate my mother's reputation and destroy my sister's identity. Suddenly, the quiet silence of the vault was broken by the sharp buzzing of my cell phone. I pulled the device from my pocket and looked at the glowing screen. It was a digital invitation forwarded by my executive assistant. The elegant gold lettering announced the upcoming annual Black Chamber of Commerce Gala taking place this weekend. It was the most prestigious and highly publicized event in the Atlanta high society calendar. The invitation proudly declared that Vivian and Isaiah were scheduled to be publicly honored and receive the highly coveted Legacy Family of the Year award. My assistant had also included an urgent side note. Vivian had just tipped off the local press corps. She was planning to use her acceptance speech at the charity gala to publicly announce her impending legal victory over the corporate trust and officially celebrate my removal from the company. She actually thought she had finally won. She thought the temporary freeze by the probate judge meant she was untouchable. She was planning to violently humiliate me in front of the entire city and claim her stolen crown. I stared at the digital invitation as a slow, calculated smile spread across my face. I looked up at Lawyer Sterling, who was watching me with quiet anticipation. I slipped the yellow envelope into my briefcase and stood up. The execution was scheduled for this weekend. It was time to end them. The digital invitation for the Black Chamber of Commerce Gala glowed brightly on my phone screen. Vivian had tipped off the local press corps, promising a massive announcement regarding her legal victory over the corporate trust. She thought the temporary freeze ordered by the probate judge meant she was utterly untouchable. She was planning to violently humiliate me in front of the entire city and publicly claim her stolen crown. I stared at the digital invitation as a slow, calculated smile spread across my face. I looked up at Lawyer Sterling, who was watching me with quiet anticipation. I slipped the yellow envelope into my briefcase and stood up. The execution was scheduled for this weekend. It was time to end them. The annual gala was the absolute pinnacle of the high society calendar in Atlanta. It was a massive, glittering event where reputations were solidified and power was publicly displayed. As the rightful CEO of the parent company, holding the ultimate executive authority, I began my meticulous preparations. I did not need to ask for permission. I simply exercised my corporate power. I contacted the event organizers and quietly gained complete control of the AV systems and the security team for the evening. I seamlessly replaced their staff with my own highly trusted personnel, ensuring that every screen, every microphone, and every exit was entirely under my command. I also made a very specific, extremely confidential phone call to a contact I had acquired during my years investigating corporate fraud. The night of the gala arrived. The grand ballroom of the luxury downtown hotel was a sea of designer gowns, expensive tuxedos, and glittering diamonds. Atlanta's wealthiest and most influential figures were seated at beautifully decorated tables sipping expensive champagne. The atmosphere was buzzing with anticipation for Vivian's highly publicized announcement. I arrived precisely 45 minutes after the event began. I did not slip in quietly through a side door. I walked directly through the massive double doors at the main entrance. I was wearing a striking tailored white power suit that fit me perfectly. The sharp lines of the suit contrasted beautifully with the soft ambient lighting of the ballroom. As I stepped into the room, the conversations near the entrance abruptly stopped. The silence spread through the massive space like a physical wave as people turned to stare at me. I could hear the hushed whispers rippling through the elite crowd. They were whispering about the mentally unfit daughter who had supposedly tried to steal her grandmother's empire. I kept my head held high, my expression completely unreadable. I walked slowly and deliberately down the center aisle, owning every single step. My parents were sitting at the VIP table right near the front stage. Vivian was wearing a spectacular emerald green gown dripping in diamonds. Isaiah sat rigidly beside her, his face tight with forced composure. Jada and Terrence were seated next to them, playing the part of the perfect supportive family. When Vivian saw me approaching, her eyes widened in genuine shock. She quickly masked it with a look of pure disdain. She leaned over and whispered something to Isaiah, who immediately glared at me. I did not stop at their table. I walked straight past them and took a seat at a reserved table near the front, ensuring I had a perfect view of the stage. The evening proceeded with the usual speeches and awards. Finally, the moment arrived. The club president stepped up to the podium and announced the recipient of the prestigious Legacy Family of the Year award. He spoke eloquently about their supposed contributions to the community and their unwavering commitment to family values. He called Vivian and Isaiah to the stage. The crowd erupted in polite applause. Vivian stood up, smoothing her expensive gown, and gracefully ascended the stairs to the stage. Isaiah followed closely behind, playing the role of the proud, supportive husband. Vivian took the microphone and looked out over the sea of faces. She took a deep breath, her eyes shining with fake, unshed tears. "Thank you," she began, her voice trembling with perfectly practiced emotion. "This award means more to us than you could ever possibly imagine. This year has been incredibly difficult for our family. We have faced challenges that tested our strength and our faith. As many of you know, we have been dealing with a deeply painful and private family matter regarding my wayward, troubled daughter, Naomi." She paused, wiping away a fake tear with a delicate lace handkerchief. It breaks a mother's heart to see her child so lost and consumed by such dark, destructive jealousy. We have tried everything to help her, but she continues to reject our love. However, we remain strong. We believe that family love conquers all obstacles. We will protect Grandmother Josephine's beautiful legacy from those who wish to selfishly exploit it. She smiled bravely, soaking up the sympathetic murmurs from the elite crowd. She turned to Isaiah, gesturing for him to step forward and accept the heavy crystal award. The audience began to clap again. I stood up from my table. The sound of my chair pushing back scraped loudly against the marble floor, cutting through the polite applause. I strode directly down the center aisle, my heels clicking sharply with every step. The applause died down, quickly replaced by tense, confused silence. Vivian's smile faltered as she watched me approach the stage. I did not stop. I ascended the short flight of stairs and walked right up to my mother. "Naomi, what are you doing?" Vivian hissed, leaning away from the microphone. "Get off this stage right now." I ignored her completely. I reached out and gently but firmly took the microphone from her trembling hands. I turned to face the elite crowd, my expression perfectly calm and composed. "My mother is absolutely right," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the massive ballroom. "Family legacy is everything. It is the foundation upon which we build our lives. And to ensure that our family legacy is fully transparent and accurately represented, I have brought some very special guests tonight." I gestured toward the main entrance at the back of the ballroom. The heavy double doors swung open simultaneously. 6 federal FBI agents wearing dark suits and clearly displaying their badges marched purposefully into the grand ballroom. The room erupted in shocked gasps and frantic whispers. The agents moved with precise, coordinated efficiency, walking directly down the center aisle toward the front stage. Vivian's face went completely ashen. She stumbled backward, grabbing Isaiah's arm for support. Isaiah looked like he was going to pass out. His eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an exit that did not exist. At the VIP table, Terrence jumped to his feet, his face contorted in sheer panic. He realized instantly what was happening. He shoved his chair back and tried to make a run for the side exit near the kitchens. 2 of the FBI agents immediately broke off from the group and intercepted him. They tackled Terrence to the marble floor, effortlessly subduing him. They pulled his arms behind his back and secured him in heavy metal handcuffs. Jada screamed in absolute horror, watching her husband being aggressively detained. The remaining 4 agents reached the front of the stage. The lead agent looked up at Isaiah, his expression completely grim and professional. "Isaiah," he announced loudly, his voice cutting through the chaotic noise of the ballroom. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Isaiah collapsed onto the stage, his legs completely giving out beneath him. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving, as the agents moved in to secure his wrists in handcuffs. The prestigious Legacy Family of the Year award slipped from his hands and shattered into pieces on the hard floor. Vivian lost all of her carefully constructed composure. Her elegant facade completely disintegrated. She screamed into the microphone, her voice echoing shrilly through the grand hall. "You treacherous snake!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You ruined your father. You destroyed this family. You are no daughter of mine. I disown you." I stood perfectly still under the blinding stage lights. I looked at Vivian with absolute zero emotion. I let her hysterical screams wash over me, completely unaffected by her toxic rage. I raised the microphone back to my lips. "You are disowning me," I asked, my voice steady and cold. "What an incredible coincidence, Vivian. Grandmother Josephine had a very specific message she wanted to deliver to you about that exact subject." I reached into the pocket of my white blazer and pulled out a small remote presenter. I pressed a single button. The massive projector screens behind the stage, which had been displaying our family crest, suddenly went completely black. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting for the final devastating blow to land. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting for the final devastating blow to land. I stood perfectly still on the elevated stage. The heavy silence in the grand room was absolute. Hundreds of the most powerful and influential figures in Atlanta high society stared at me. Their expensive champagne glasses hovered frozen in midair. I could feel the intense heat of the stage spotlights beating down on my tailored white suit. I looked down at the VIP table where my family sat. The utter confusion on their faces was truly a beautiful sight to behold. Elaine clutched her diamond necklace, her breathing shallow and erratic. Isaiah gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning completely white. Charmaine looked frantically between her husband Terrence and the 6 federal agents standing rigidly at the back of the room. They had absolutely no idea what was about to hit them. I raised my right hand, holding the small remote presenter high in the air. I snapped my fingers loudly. The sharp sound echoed through the quiet ballroom like a gunshot. I pressed the center button on the device. Instantly, the massive projector screens behind me roared back to life. But they were no longer displaying our prestigious family crest or the glowing logo of the Chamber of Commerce. Instead, the screens were flooded with blinding high-resolution scans of highly classified financial documents. As a forensic accountant, I had spent weeks meticulously compiling this undeniable evidence. Now it was being broadcast in staggering detail for the entire city elite to see. Massive spreadsheets illuminated the dark room with stark white light. The screens displayed Isaiah and Terrence money laundering ledgers in crystal clear definition. I had color-coded every single illegal transaction to make it effortlessly simple for the audience to understand. Bright red lines connected Isaiah corporate accounts directly to shady offshore bank transfers located in the Cayman Islands and the Bahamas. Beside those transfers were high-definition images of forged art appraisals. The fake documents proved exactly how Terrence had been using his supposedly prestigious art gallery as a massive criminal front. He had been inflating the value of worthless paintings to wash the millions of dollars that Isaiah was systematically embezzling from grandmother Josephine cosmetic empire. The visual evidence was entirely inescapable and perfectly organized. I had ensured that every single digital file was authenticated and time-stamped, proving a decade-long conspiracy of grand corporate theft. The room erupted into loud, frantic gasps. The polite society whispers instantly morphed into a deafening roar of sheer disbelief. Wealthy investors and corporate board members leaned forward in their luxurious chairs, squinting at the massive glowing screens. They could clearly read the illicit routing numbers and the heavily inflated fake invoice amounts. The undeniable proof of my father, massive underground gambling addiction, and his extensive criminal enterprise was fully exposed. There was no way to spin this. There was no public relations firm in the entire world that could possibly clean up this catastrophic mess. The pristine legacy of our family was being incinerated right before their very eyes. I lowered my hand and looked directly at the federal agents standing at the back of the ballroom. I gave them a single subtle nod. The 6 FBI agents immediately marched forward. Their heavy boots pounded against the polished marble floor, moving with terrifying synchronized precision. They walked straight down the center aisle, heading directly for the VIP table. The crowd parted ways for them, pulling their chairs back rapidly to avoid getting caught in the inevitable crossfire. The tension in the air was absolutely suffocating. Down at the VIP table, panic finally overtook the criminals. Terrence realized his lavish lifestyle was officially over. His eyes darted wildly toward the kitchen doors located on the far left side of the ballroom. He saw his only possible avenue of escape. Terrence shoved his heavy wooden chair backward with violent force. He leaped to his feet, his face contorted in absolute pure terror. He turned and made a desperate, panicked run for the kitchen. A young waiter carrying a large silver tray of expensive champagne flutes happened to be standing directly in his path. Terrence did not even try to avoid him. He shoved the waiter violently in the chest, sending the poor man crashing to the floor. The silver tray flipped over, and dozens of crystal glasses shattered against the marble, creating a loud, explosive crash. Champagne sprayed everywhere, soaking the expensive silk dresses of nearby socialites. The elegant women shrieked loudly and scrambled out of the way, trying to protect their designer gowns from the flying shards of sharp glass. Terrence bolted toward the swinging wooden doors, but he severely underestimated the speed and tactical training of the seasoned federal agents. 2 of the agents broke away from the main group and sprinted fiercely across the wide ballroom. They closed the distance in mere seconds. Just as Terrence reached out a desperate hand to push the kitchen doors open, the lead agent lunged forward. He tackled Terrence hard, driving his broad shoulder directly into Terrence's lower back with immense physical force. The impact was brutal and highly effective. Terrence flew forward and slammed face first into the hard marble floor. The heavy thud of his body hitting the ground echoed over the screaming crowd. The second agent immediately dropped his knee heavily onto the back of Terrence's neck, pinning him securely to the floor. Terrence thrashed and kicked wildly, groaning in deep pain, but he was completely physically trapped. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists signaled the definitive absolute end of his arrogant criminal career. Charmaine stood at the VIP table screaming in pure, unadulterated horror as she watched her flashy husband being aggressively subdued and detained like a common violent street thug. While Terrence was being heavily restrained, the other 4 FBI agents quickly surrounded the VIP table. Isaiah did not try to run. He knew his shaking legs would not carry him. The carefully constructed facade of the polished, respectable patriarch completely crumbled into dust. Isaiah collapsed heavily into his plush dining chair. His chest began heaving erratically as he started to aggressively hyperventilate. He clutched his chest, his expensive custom tuxedo suddenly feeling like a suffocating straitjacket. The cold sweat poured down his forehead, ruining his carefully groomed appearance and staining his stiff white collar. The lead agent stepped right up to the edge of the dining table. He looked down at my father with an expression of complete professional disgust. Isaiah, you are officially under arrest for multiple severe counts of federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and highly organized money laundering. The agent announced, his deep voice cutting through the chaotic loud noise of the terrified ballroom. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Isaiah could not even speak a single syllable. He just stared blankly at the shiny federal badge flashing directly in front of his face. He realized he had stolen millions from his own mother and betrayed his only biological daughter just to blindly fund the luxurious, excessive lifestyle of a wife who never truly respected him. His entire life was a pathetic, hollow lie, and now he was going to spend the rest of his miserable days rotting alone in a federal penitentiary. Elaine watched her husband being hauled roughly out of his chair by 2 heavily armed agents. The shocking reality of the situation finally shattered her delicate psychological defense mechanisms. Elaine lost absolutely all of her carefully constructed poise and composure. The elegant, poised socialite vanished, instantly replaced by a rabid, cornered animal. She realized that her prestigious country club memberships, her luxury vehicles, and her flawless public image were completely permanently destroyed. She was going to be the ultimate laughingstock of the Atlanta black elite forever. Elaine spun around violently and glared at me standing tall on the stage. She grabbed the microphone stand that was still positioned near the wooden podium. She ripped the microphone from its cradle, her hands shaking with unadulterated toxic rage. She marched toward the very edge of the stage, her heavy emerald green gown dragging clumsily behind her on the polished floor. "You treacherous snake!" Elaine screamed into the microphone, her shrill, piercing voice echoing violently through the massive hall. The harsh feedback from the speakers caused several guests to cover their ears, but Elaine did not care about decorum anymore. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. "You ruined your father. You destroyed this entire family just because you were bitterly jealous of our happiness. You are a disgusting, hateful monster. You are no daughter of mine. I disown you right here and now." Her hysterical screaming washed over the completely shocked crowd. Dozens of people were actively recording her massive public meltdown on their smartphones, capturing every single humiliating second of her social demise. Elaine stood there breathing heavily, her expensive makeup smudged and her eyes wide with frantic, sheer desperation. She truly thought her harsh words would finally break my spirit. She thought that publicly disowning me would be the ultimate agonizing punishment, the final devastating blow that would bring me to my knees in weeping tears. I stood perfectly still under the blinding bright stage lights. I did not flinch. I did not frown. I looked down at Elaine with absolute zero emotion. My heart was completely steady. My mind was perfectly clear and incredibly sharp. I had spent 35 years desperately craving her maternal validation, begging for her basic love, and silently enduring her relentless psychological abuse. But standing here today, looking down at this pathetic, desperate, empty woman, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound sense of liberating, wonderful emptiness. The heavy, suffocating chains of her conditional toxic love had been permanently, fundamentally shattered. I slowly and deliberately raised my own microphone to my lips. My voice was incredibly calm, smooth, and completely devoid of any sorrow, pity, or regret. "You are disowning me," I asked, staring directly into her panicked, watering eyes. "What an incredible coincidence, Elaine." Grandmother Josephine had a very specific final message she wanted to deliver to you tonight about that exact same subject. I confidently raised the small black remote presenter in my right hand, pointing it directly at the massive projection screen standing tall behind me. I firmly pressed the center button one final time. The glaring illuminated financial documents vanished instantly, and the massive screens went completely incredibly black. The pitch-black screens loomed over the massive ballroom, casting a heavy shadow across the stage. The sudden absence of the glaring financial documents left the hundreds of wealthy elite guests completely breathless and waiting. The terrifying silence in the hall was so absolute that I could hear the panicked, ragged breathing of my father Isaiah, who was pinned to his chair by federal agents. Elaine stood just a few feet away, her manicured hands trembling violently by her sides. The microphone had slipped from her grasp and clattered against the marble floor, but nobody moved to retrieve it. The arrogant socialite who had spent 35 years making my life a living nightmare was now completely paralyzed by the terrifying unknown. I kept my eyes locked on her terrified face, refusing to look away. I wanted to witness every single second of her impending destruction. I raised the small black remote presenter once more and firmly pressed the small right directional button down now. A sharp electronic hum vibrated through the speaker system. The massive projector screens flickered and blazed back to life, displaying a single high-definition video file. The crowd gasped collectively as the regal commanding image of Grandmother Josephine appeared on the glowing screens. She was sitting upright in her custom leather executive chair, wearing her signature pearls and a severe, unyielding expression. Even from beyond the grave her presence commanded absolute, unquestionable authority. The video had been recorded in the quiet solitude of her corporate office just weeks before her passing. Her dark eyes stared directly into the camera lens, burning with an intense, fierce clarity that made the entire ballroom freeze in pure terror. "Hello, Elaine," my grandmother voice boomed through the ballroom speakers, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. The rich, familiar tone of the deceased billionaire matriarch sent a violent physical shudder through my mother body. Elaine staggered backward, her expensive emerald green couture gown rustling loudly against the stage floor. She shook her head in sheer denial, unable to even look away from the towering bright screens. "If you are watching this video," Grandmother Josephine continued, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated contempt, "it means you have finally shown your true colors to the world. It means my resilient granddaughter Naomi has successfully backed you into a corner you can never escape. You spent 30 years parading around Atlanta, pretending to be the perfect high society wife. You looked down your surgically altered nose at the hardworking people, and you viciously tormented the only child my son produced. You thought your pathetic little secrets were buried deep underground where no one would find them. But you severely underestimated me. I built a billion-dollar empire from scratch. I know exactly how to spot a grifter." The elite crowd of wealthy investors and politicians watched in stunned silence. They were witnessing the total public annihilation of a woman who had ruthlessly clawed her way to the top of their exclusive hierarchy. I glanced down at the VIP table. Charmaine was sitting completely frozen, her mouth hanging wide open in pure shock. Terrence was still pinned face down on the marble floor by federal agents, twisting his neck to safely watch the screens. "You thought I did not know how you trapped my weak, cowardly son all those years ago," Grandmother Josephine stated, her eyes narrowing fiercely. "You thought I did not know about your pathetic attempts to blackmail your way into my prestigious family. You played the role of the devoted, obedient wife while secretly bleeding my company dry to fund your disgusting vanity. You stood in my house and smiled in my face while treating my heir Naomi like a peasant. But I saw everything. I documented everything, and I knew the most devastating secret of all. Elaine raised her hands to her face, desperately trying to block out the booming voice of the matriarch. "Stop it!" she whimpered, her voice barely a pathetic squeak. "Somebody turn it off. Please turn it off." But no one moved. The security and audiovisual teams were entirely under my corporate control. The execution would proceed uninterrupted. "Did you really think I was completely blind, Elaine?" My grandmother's voice thundered with terrifying righteous fury. "Did you honestly believe I would ever hand over the keys to my legendary cosmetic empire to a worthless entitled parasite who does not even share a single drop of this royal family blood?" The ballroom erupted into a massive, deafening roar of absolute chaos. Hundreds of wealthy guests screamed in pure disbelief. Down at the VIP table, Charmaine leaped out of her chair, her face twisted in utter confusion and terror. "What is she talking about?" Charmaine shrieked, looking wildly at her arrested husband, and then up at Elaine. "Mom, what is she talking about?" On the massive screens, the image of grandmother Josephine smoothly faded away. It was instantly replaced by a stark clinical scan of an old yellowed medical file. The official hospital letterhead was clearly visible, displaying a date from exactly 29 years ago. The high-definition screens magnified the undeniable genetic testing matrices and the conclusive laboratory reports so that every single person in the massive ballroom could clearly read the devastating truth. I highlighted the final clinical conclusion in bright red marker before uploading the file to the system. The genetic markers between Isaiah and Charmaine were fundamentally incompatible. The indisputable medical document proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Charmaine, the pampered golden child who had been spoiled and worshipped her entire life, was not Isaiah's biological daughter. She was the direct product of a secret illicit affair Elaine had conducted with a former estate groundskeeper just 3 years into her marriage. The sheer monumental scale of Elaine's toxic hypocrisy was staggering. She had spent nearly 3 decades portraying herself as the ultimate symbol of high society perfection while carrying a world-shattering secret. She had intentionally forced her husband to blindly fund the luxurious, extravagant lifestyle of another man's child. She had actively used my grandmother's hard-earned wealth to pamper an illegitimate heir, while systematically neglecting and brutally abusing me, the only legitimate biological granddaughter in the family. I looked down at my father. Isaiah was still sitting in his plush dining chair, his wrists bound tightly behind his back by the heavy steel handcuffs. He was staring blankly at the massive glowing screens, his eyes wide and vacant. The total psychological collapse of his entire reality was happening in real time. He stopped hyperventilating and sat there paralyzed by the truth. He had willingly committed massive federal crimes to maintain his lavish lifestyle. He had stolen millions of dollars from his own mother. He partnered with his shady son-in-law to run an illegal money laundering operation. He silently watched his wife mercilessly torture his only real daughter Naomi for 35 years. And he had done all of this horrific damage just to finance the comfortable life of a woman who had completely betrayed him and a golden child that was not his own flesh and blood. The profound absolute tragedy of his cowardly existence finally shattered him completely. Isaiah dropped his chin to his chest and began weeping softly, the tears falling onto his ruined tuxedo. The federal agents surrounding him did not show a single ounce of pity. They stood rigidly, maintaining their secure perimeter as the wealthy crowd continued to scream and gossip wildly. The destruction of the family facade was complete, but the collateral damage was just beginning to explode. Charmaine realized the terrifying reality of her new existence. Because she was not a biological relative of grandmother Josephine, she had absolutely zero legal standing to contest the will. She was entirely penniless. Her husband Terrence was going to a federal penitentiary for wire fraud. Her mother was a disgraced social pariah. The golden child lost every single ounce of her unearned power in just 5 minutes. Charmaine let out a blood-curdling hysterical scream that cut right through the noisy ballroom. She rushed toward the elevated stage, her designer heels slipping wildly on the polished floor. She scrambled up the short flight of stairs, completely ignoring the shocked stares of the audience. She lunged directly at Elaine, grabbing tightly the expensive fabric of her emerald green gown. Tell me it is a lie, Charmaine shrieked violently, shaking Elaine by the shoulders. Tell me she faked those documents. Tell me I am an heir. You promised me millions. Tell me I am not a bastard. Elaine, unhinged by the loss of her elite social standing and the physical assault from her golden child, finally snapped. She ripped herself out of Charmaine's desperate grasp. With a vicious snarl, Elaine raised her hand and slapped Charmaine squarely across the face with explosive force. The sharp crack echoed through the ballroom as smartphone cameras flashed brightly, capturing the ultimate demise of Atlanta's most prestigious legacy family. The massive projection screens cast a harsh blue glow over the shattered remnants of my family. Isaiah did not struggle as the federal agents hauled him up from his plush dining chair. The heavy steel handcuffs clinked sharply against his wrists, echoing a final death knell for his carefully manufactured life of prestige. He looked utterly broken. For decades, he had stolen from his own mother and facilitated a massive criminal enterprise just to finance the extravagant lifestyle of a wife who had betrayed him. I had funded the existence of a golden child who did not even share his DNA, while treating his only true biological daughter like disposable garbage. The sheer magnitude of his wasted, cowardly existence finally crushed whatever pride he had left. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the marble floor as the agents marched him down the center aisle. Terrence was significantly less dignified. As the federal agents yanked him up from the hard ground, his custom-tailored tuxedo jacket tore violently at the shoulder seam. He thrashed around and whined loudly, begging the stern agents to let him explain, begging anyone in the massive room to listen to his pathetic excuses. He looked wildly at Jada, pleading with her to call a high-priced criminal defense lawyer. But Jada was completely paralyzed by the catastrophic implosion of her own reality. The high society crowd actively shrank back as Terrence was dragged past their tables holding their designer garments close to avoid touching a disgraced violent criminal. The heavy ballroom doors finally swung shut completely behind the federal agents, and the two corrupt men were permanently removed from the glittering, beautiful world of the Atlanta elite. With the criminals officially escorted off the premises, the heavy, suffocating tension in the massive room shifted entirely onto Vivian. In the ultra-exclusive, highly judgmental ecosystem of the Black elite, a pristine reputation was the ultimate currency. Wealth could be acquired through business, but social standing was carefully cultivated over generations of flawless behavior. Vivian had just been brutally exposed not only as a ruthless, calculating abuser, but as a common, desperate grifter who had weaponized a child born from a secret, illicit affair. The devastating truth was undeniable. I stood on the elevated stage and watched the silent, brutal execution of her carefully curated social life. The wealthy society matrons, the prominent local politicians, and the influential corporate board members did not scream or hurl angry insults. They simply turned their backs. It happened in a stunning, synchronized wave of absolute total rejection. Women who had warmly kissed Vivian on the cheek just an hour ago now pivoted smoothly away, refusing to even look in her specific direction. Wealthy husbands placed protective hands on the lower backs of their elegant wives, guiding them swiftly away from the toxic radioactive fallout radiating from my disgraced mother. Vivian stood trembling uncontrollably near the edge of the stage. Her manicured hands grasped desperately at the empty air, as if she could physically catch her rapidly evaporating social status. She called out the first names of her closest country club friends, begging them to stop and listen to her side of the fabricated story. She pleaded for a single moment of grace, but they completely ignored her frantic cries. They treated her like an invisible, contagious disease, moving swiftly toward the exit doors to escape the humiliating spectacle of her total ruin. Then the final devastating blow was delivered with absolute precision. The distinguished, long-standing president of the elite country club stepped out from the retreating crowd. He was a towering, highly respected figure in the exclusive community, known for his strict adherence to traditional high society rules. He walked calmly toward Vivian, his expression completely devoid of any warmth or basic human sympathy. Vivian reached out to him, her voice cracking with desperate, pathetic hope. She thought his presence meant salvation. She was entirely wrong. He did not take her trembling hand. Instead, he looked her dead in the eye and spoke with quiet, absolute finality. He informed Vivian that her prestigious membership to the club and all affiliated charitable organizations was permanently revoked, effective immediately. He stated that her deceitful actions had severely compromised the integrity of their esteemed community. He extended his open palm and coldly demanded that she hand over her diamond-encrusted membership pin right there on the spot. Vivian gasped loudly, as if she had been physically stabbed in the chest with a jagged knife. That small piece of sparkling jewelry represented her entire identity, her entire reason for existing in this affluent city. Her shaking hands moved slowly to her emerald green gown. She unclasped the diamond pin and dropped it into the president's outstretched, waiting palm. He turned around and quickly walked away from the stage without saying another single word, leaving Vivian completely and utterly permanently exiled from the only world she ever cared about. While Vivian was experiencing her complete public social annihilation, Jada was undergoing a terrifying private financial realization. The former golden child stood shivering in the middle of the chaotic ballroom, her wide eyes darting frantically between the massive projection screens and my perfectly calm face. The genetic testing results displayed brightly on the screens meant far more than just a shocking, deeply embarrassing family scandal. To a woman who had never earned a single dollar independently, it meant absolute total financial ruin. Jada had relied entirely on the family wealth and her arrogant, unchecked assumption that she was the rightful heir to the massive cosmetic empire. But grandmother Josephine was a brilliant and exceptionally meticulous businesswoman who left absolutely nothing to chance. As the designated forensic accountant and sole trustee, I knew exactly what the rigid legal language in the corporate trust documents explicitly stated. The residual trust assets, the massive corporate dividends, and the lucrative property deeds were strictly legally reserved for the direct biological blood grandchildren of the legendary founder. There were absolutely no hidden loopholes. There were no vague legal interpretations that a clever lawyer could manipulate. The biological requirement was an ironclad, undeniable mandate designed to protect the true wealthy family lineage. Jada realized the horrific, unyielding truth crashing down upon her pampered life. Because she possessed absolutely zero biological relation to the matriarch and was not explicitly named as a specific individual beneficiary in the final overriding legal document, she had zero legal standing to contest the ironclad will. She was entirely penniless. Her flashy husband was going to a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, leaving behind millions of dollars in highly dangerous debt to violent loan sharks. Her mother was a disgraced, isolated pariah who no longer had access to the stolen corporate funds that had financed their lavish lifestyle for decades. The golden child had lost her sparkling crown, her limitless wealth, and her entire inflated identity in a matter of terrible minutes. The protective, ignorant bubble of arrogance and supreme entitlement that had shielded her from reality was violently, permanently popped. She looked around the glittering ballroom, desperately searching for a single friendly face to offer her salvation. But the high society crowd was already filing out of the grand room, eager to escape the messy, toxic wreckage of our burning family. The influential people who used to praise her beauty now treated her like invisible trash. Jada slowly turned her desperate attention back to me. I was still standing perfectly still on the elevated stage, holding the small black remote presenter in my steady hand. I looked down at her with the exact same cold, calculating gaze she had directed at me for my entire miserable life. I watched the arrogant pageant queen completely break down under the crushing weight of her new destitute reality. Jada scrambled frantically up the short flight of carpeted stairs to the stage. She did not yell or throw a hysterical, violent tantrum like she had in the probate courtroom days prior. Instead, the sheer terrifying reality of her utter destitution forced her to do the one single thing I never thought I would ever witness. Jada fell heavily to her knees right at my tailored white shoes. The expensive silk of her designer dress pooled messily around her legs as she looked up at me with wide, terrified, weeping eyes. She grabbed the hem of my trousers, her hands shaking violently. Massive tears streamed down her perfectly contoured face, completely ruining her makeup. Zara, please, Jada wailed loudly, begging her big sister for help, forgiveness, and a safe place to stay. Please do not leave me on the street. I have nothing left in this world. I looked down at her, my face completely unreadable. I reached inside my blazer, pulled out a printout of a cheap low-income apartment listing, and dropped it directly into her lap. You always proudly told me to pull myself up by my bootstraps, Jada. It is finally time for you to buy some heavy boots now. The morning after the gala felt different. The suffocating weight of my family toxic expectations had lifted from my shoulders entirely. The air in Atlanta felt crisp and clean. I drove my car heading toward Lawyer Sterling prestigious law firm. The massive corporate scandal had already hit the national news cycle. Isaiah and Terrence were sitting in a federal holding cell denied bail due to the sheer magnitude of their financial crimes. The high society of Buckhead was buzzing with the explosive gossip regarding Elaine public downfall and Charmaine's shocking paternity revelation. Everything I meticulously planned had perfectly executed itself. I parked in the secure underground garage and took the private elevator directly up to the executive reception area. I stepped out of the elevator holding a freshly brewed cup of black coffee. The moment the polished steel doors slid open, I was greeted by a profoundly satisfying sight. Elaine and Charmaine were sitting together on a leather sofa in the sleek glass lobby. They looked absolutely terrible. The former queens of Atlanta high society were completely disheveled. Elaine was still wearing the same emerald green couture gown from the charity gala the night before. The expensive silk fabric was deeply wrinkled and stained with spilled champagne. Her perfectly highlighted hair was a tangled, messy bird nest. Her dark mascara was heavily smudged beneath her swollen red eyes. Charmaine sat slumped beside her mother, wearing a borrowed, oversized hoodie over her ruined designer dress. Her arrogant, sparkling eyes were totally dull and vacant. They were sitting in the law firm lobby because they had absolutely nowhere else to go. Last night, right after the gala completely imploded, they had tried to return to the massive $8 million Buckhead estate. But grandmother Josephine had designed the corporate trust with flawless precision. The sprawling luxury mansion belonged legally and entirely to the corporate trust entity. As the newly reinstated sole trustee, my very first official act was executing an immediate emergency eviction order. I had an elite private security team waiting at the heavy wrought iron gates. When Elaine and Charmaine arrived, the guards firmly denied them entry. They were permanently locked out. They were forced to spend the night sleeping uncomfortably in the sterile lobby of the law firm, desperately hoping to speak with Sterling the moment his office opened. When Elaine saw me step out of the elevator, her bloodshot eyes widened in sheer desperation. She immediately scrambled up from the leather sofa. Her bare feet slapped against the polished marble floor. She had abandoned her expensive designer heels somewhere during the chaotic night. Charmaine stayed seated on the couch, pulling the oversized hoodie tighter around her shoulders, unable to look me in the eye. The arrogant pageant queen was utterly broken. Elaine stumbled aggressively toward me, throwing away every single ounce of her precious high society pride. The woman who had spent 35 years actively treating me like an invisible peasant suddenly dropped heavily to her knees, right in front of my tailored shoes. She reached out with trembling manicured hands and desperately grabbed the hem of my crisp white blazer. I looked down at her with absolute zero emotion. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. "Naomi, please!" Elaine wailed loudly, her voice cracking with hysterical panic. "You have to help us. We have absolutely nothing. My bank accounts are completely frozen. The federal agent seized my car. I cannot even afford to buy breakfast. Please, Naomi, you are my daughter. You have to save your mother." I stared at her pathetic, weeping face. I remembered every single time she had viciously mocked my career. I remembered how she had violently snatched the water glass from my hand just days ago, telling me my negative energy would taint the family legacy. I remembered how she had thrown me out into the freezing rain on Christmas Eve because Charmaine needed my bedroom for her pageant dresses. "I gave you life." Naomi Elaine cried, using the ultimate manipulative tactic that toxic mothers deploy when they run out of options. She hit her chest dramatically with her fist. "I carried you in my womb. I suffered through the agonizing pains of childbirth to bring you into this world. You owe me for giving you life. I raised you. I fed you. You cannot leave your own mother destitute on the street. I am begging you. Just give me a small monthly stipend from the trust fund. Just enough to live on, please." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at the sobbing, broken woman kneeling at my feet and felt a profound sense of absolute liberating emptiness. I calmly reached down and smoothly pulled the hem of my blazer right out of her grasping, frantic hands. I walked past her and stepped up to the mahogany reception desk. I set my coffee cup down and opened my leather briefcase. I reached inside and retrieved a single crisp sheet of paper. I turned around and looked at Elaine, who was still kneeling pathetically on the marble floor. I held the paper out toward her. "I owe you nothing, Elaine," I stated, perfectly smooth and incredibly cold. "But you actually owe me a very specific amount." Elaine slowly pushed herself up from the floor, sniffing loudly. She reached out with a trembling hand and took the piece of paper. She blinked her bloodshot eyes, trying to focus on the printed black text. It was not a legal settlement. It was not a trust fund distribution check. It was a highly detailed, itemized financial invoice. "What is this?" Elaine whispered, trembling with deep confusion. "That is an itemized invoice totaling exactly $250,000. I explained, my tone entirely clinical and professional. "That is the exact calculated cost of the intense out-of-pocket psychiatric trauma therapy I had to pay for over the last 15 years. I had to spend $250,000 to mentally survive the relentless psychological abuse you happily inflicted upon me. You manipulated my father and enabled my sister to torment me. You used my depression as a weapon to steal my inheritance." Elaine stared at the invoice, the final terrifying reality of her situation completely setting in. The total amount was an insurmountable mountain of debt for a woman with zero marketable job skills. "This is what you owe me," I continued, maintaining my icy composure. "You are officially bankrupt, and your reputation in the Atlanta black elite is permanently incinerated. Nobody in Buckhead will ever give you a dime. So I highly suggest you go down to the local shopping mall and fill out some minimum wage job applications. You can work retail to pay off your massive debt to me. When your outstanding balance reaches zero, we will talk about whether you deserve a monthly stipend." Elaine's mouth opened in sheer, unadulterated horror. She looked over at Charmaine, seeking any shred of support, but the golden child simply buried her face in her hands and began sobbing quietly. They were entirely defeated. They had absolutely no leverage, no money, and no future. The toxic matriarch was completely, permanently neutralized. I turned my attention to the two large armed security guards standing quietly by the reception desk. I gave them a sharp, authoritative nod. "Gentlemen," I said firmly, pointing toward Elaine and Charmaine, "these two women are actively trespassing on private corporate property. Please escort them out of the building immediately. If they refuse to leave quietly, you have my full authorization to contact the local police and have them arrested for public disturbance." The guards stepped forward, grim and professional. They grabbed Elaine by her arms and forcefully hauled her toward the glass exit doors. Elaine began screaming wildly, her shrill voice echoing through the sleek lobby. She shouted vicious insults, but her words meant nothing to me anymore. Charmaine scrambled to her feet and blindly followed her mother, completely terrified of being arrested. I stood quietly by the reception desk and listened as Elaine's frantic wailing slowly faded away down the long exterior hallway. The heavy glass doors slid shut, severing my connection to their toxic existence forever. The oppressive weight that anchored my soul for 35 years vanished. I took a slow, satisfying sip of my coffee. The rich, dark roast tasted absolutely incredible. The inner office doors opened. Lawyer Sterling stepped into the lobby holding thick legal folders. He looked at the empty space where my mother had been kneeling, and then looked directly at me. His stern face broke into a very rare, subtle smile of deep professional respect. I walked over to the heavy doors, feeling victorious and completely free. I looked at the attorney and took another sip of my coffee. "All right, Sterling," I said, brimming with sharp, undeniable authority. "Is it time to announce the new board of directors?" Lawyer Sterling nodded and pressed a button on his desk intercom. He instructed his assistant to send our special guest into the executive boardroom. The heavy wooden doors opened and Aunt Sharon walked into the room. She looked older and exhausted. The last 8 years had been harsh on her. Vivian had ruthlessly destroyed her reputation and finances by framing her for Isaiah and his embezzlement. Sharon had spent nearly a decade living in disgrace while the criminals paraded around Buckhead in luxury vehicles. I stood up from my chair and walked around the mahogany desk. I did not offer a handshake. Instead, I wrapped my arms around her in an embrace. Aunt Sharon began to weep into my shoulder. I pulled back and looked into her eyes. I told her that the nightmare was over. I explained that I had recovered the ledgers and provided the authorities with the proof of her innocence. Her name was cleared, but I was not just giving her back her reputation. I handed her a thick corporate folder containing an employment contract. I reinstated her at Josephine Cosmetics with back pay for the 8 years she had lost. Furthermore, I named her as the member of the executive board of directors. Aunt Sharon collapsed into a chair, overcome with gratitude. The rightful order of our family was being restored. Over the next few months, the devastating consequences of my strategic retaliation played out perfectly across the city of Atlanta. The swift and brutal justice delivered to my treacherous family was an absolute masterpiece of natural karma. Isaiah and Terrence did not even try to fight the massive mountain of federal evidence I had handed over to the authorities. They were completely cornered. The local news stations broadcasted the anticipated sentencing hearing live. I sat in my spacious living room watching my former father and my former brother-in-law standing before a stern federal judge. They were stripped of their expensive suits and forced to wear orange prison jumpsuits. They both plead guilty to extensive wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and highly organized money laundering. The judge showed them zero mercy, sentencing them both to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Their flashy, arrogant smiles were permanently erased. Vivian suffered a fate that was arguably much worse than federal prison for a woman so deeply obsessed with high society status. With her bank accounts completely frozen and her pristine reputation violently incinerated by the local media, she was forced to enter the actual working-class reality she had always viciously mocked. I hired a private investigator just to keep tabs on her spectacular fall from grace. He sent me a highly satisfying photograph. Vivian was now working the cosmetics counter at a cheap mid-tier department store in the suburbs. She was forced to wear a terrible polyester uniform and stand on her feet for 10 hours a day. The ultimate poetic justice was watching her apply cheap makeup samples to the very same working-class women she used to arrogantly look down upon from her country club balcony. She was a miserable social outcast trapped in a life of minimum wage retail. Jada experienced a similarly brutal reality check. The former golden child who had never worked a single day in her pampered life was abruptly thrust into harsh poverty. Without the stolen corporate trust funds funding her lavish vanity, she lost everything. Her luxury vehicles were rapidly repossessed, and her designer wardrobe was sold off just to pay for basic groceries. My investigator sent me a video of Jada struggling immensely to carry heavy plastic grocery bags up 3 flights of dirty concrete stairs to a cramped low-income apartment complex. She was sweating profusely and looking utterly miserable. The glittering pageant queen was finally learning how to pull herself up by her bootstraps just like I had suggested. My ultimate payoff arrived on a crisp, beautiful Monday morning. I took the private executive elevator up to the breathtaking glass-walled CEO suite at the very top of the Josephine Cosmetics skyscraper. The massive corner office overlooked the sprawling, vibrant Atlanta skyline. The city stretched out before me, a vast kingdom of endless corporate possibility. The plush leather furniture and the sleek modern decor reflected a new era of powerful, focused leadership. I walked slowly across the plush carpet toward the grand marble mantelpiece located on the far wall. Sitting on the polished stone was an old, heavily curated family photograph that Vivian had forced everyone to take many years ago. It was a picture-perfect representation of their toxic, glamorous facade. Isaiah and Vivian were smiling brightly in the center, while Jada posed perfectly beside them. I had been purposely brutally cropped out of the frame entirely, as if I never even existed. I picked up the heavy silver frame and stared at the fake smiling faces of the people who had tried to destroy my life. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I just felt completely, utterly free. I dropped the fraudulent photograph directly into the metal trash can beside the desk. in its rightful place on the center of the marble mantel. I set down a simple, elegant, silver-framed picture. It was a beautiful, candid photograph of just me and grandmother Josephine smiling warmly together. The image captured the genuine, authentic love and mutual respect that had ultimately saved my life. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer. I picked up the heavy metal keys to my brand new silver Aston Martin from the pristine glass desk. I turned my back on the trash can and walked confidently toward the heavy oak door. I paused at the heavy wooden doorway, looking back out over my massive corporate empire. I smiled a truly sharp and very victorious smile. Grandma was absolutely right, I said, my voice steady and completely unshakable. Business is strictly family. And starting today, this family only has one boss.